After 3 long patches of waiting, we can finally play Pyro Traveler, but were they worth the wait? I've tested many different team options for Traveler to find out, so let's dive right in and see. So, Pyro Traveler follows the same pattern as most other Traveler elements, being that their kit is basically a heavily watered down version of the Archons. So much like Mavuika, Traveler can be used either as an on-field DPS or as an off-field Pyro applier and buffer. Let's first take a look at their on-field teams. Now keep in mind with the footage I'll be showing in this video, for some of it I was on a friend's account to use units that I don't have. The Traveler on their account is not built for damage at all, and even with the Traveler on my account, we don't actually have Traveler C6 yet, which is huge for their damage as it gives 40 crit damage plus a Pyro infusion. You don't need the infusion if you have C6 Bennett, but 40 crit damage is still huge. So don't take the numbers you see here too seriously. It's primarily for showcasing the rotations. But with that said, for DPS Traveler's combo, you want to utilize their charged attack as much as possible, as it is their highest multiplier. However, you can't just spam in 1C, as that will burn through stamina way too fast. Instead, it's optimal to do in 2C. Traveler can perform up to 6 into C, but it does still use a lot of stamina. One thing I found helpful is to use Traveler's burst after their first into C instead of before. That way, they recover a bit of stamina while casting the burst. Also, a lot of the times, you won't actually go all the way to 6 into C due to buff up times, and you might stop at 5 into C, or just before the 6th charged attack, and in that case, stamina management shouldn't be a big issue. Now, one of the first things I noticed with DPS Traveler is they apply a pretty high amount of Pyro since their skill is applying it alongside their auto attacks. Because of this, melt teams do not work, and Farina is very hard to make work as solo Hydro, but it's possible. One way you can make solo Hydro Farina work is by using an Electro unit and doing Overvape, as the Electro application will help prevent Pyro from ever becoming the aura. R1 is who you want to be using here, as he does respectable sub-DPS damage while providing good buffing with Scroll to all 3 elements, plus the attack bonus buff that he provides with C6, as well as Elegy if you happen to have it. And the energy refund that R1 provides is also really nice, since Traveler can have somewhat high energy requirements. The unfortunate thing is, you do still miss a few Vaporize even with Auron here, about 2 to 3, but even with that accounted for, Auron is the only viable scroll user for this team. This is definitely one of, if not the overall best team for DPS Traveler. As you can see from the math, it comes in at around 75k team DPS, with Traveler doing about 1 million personal damage. It's nothing exceptional by any means, but for a free unit, it's pretty nice. The other way that you can make Frina work as solo Hydro for Traveler is by playing a Plunge team. You do have to be very careful here, because the application from Traveler's skill can cause you to end up with a Pyro Aura if you're not being careful. But assuming everything plays out right, Traveler can fit in 7 plunges, which do pretty good damage, as the self buffs Traveler has, such as the crit damage of their C6, do apply to their plunges as well. Overall, this seems to be a bit stronger than the Overvape team, doing more damage over a bit longer of a rotation. However, I did find this Plunge team to be far less consistent. More often than not, I would miss Vaporize by the 6th Plunge, and if you find that happening to you, then the Overvape team will be better. Those were the only solo Hydrofarina teams that I found to be worthwhile for Pyro Traveler. I did try using an Animo unit like Kazuha and Hydro absorbing his burst, but as soon as his burst expired, Traveler would stop vaporizing, so it just wasn't worth it. But then, why don't we just do double Hydro? You certainly can, and it'll work, and you won't miss any vaporize. Elon does more damage than Auron, but buffs by a lot less, so how well double Hydro compares to Overvape for you will depend on the investment of your account. As far as the calcs go, a C6 Auron is superior to Yelan here, but if your Traveler isn't too well invested, or if you have a well invested Yelan, then she'll definitely be better. Another team I looked into for DPS Traveler is Chevres Overload, with a team of Traveler, Chevres, Bennett, and Oraron. Oraron can be used here since Traveler deals Night Soul damage. This actually has pretty nice advantages over Vaporize. Aside from the burst, Traveler doesn't have any consistent large multipliers that really want to be vaporized, so Chevres's buffing can be just as valuable, if not more. On top of that, this is a triple Pyro team, so Traveler will need to build virtually no energy recharge at all. Overall, this is actually Traveler's highest DPS team at 83k team DPS. However, it is important to keep in mind that this is an overload team with Bennett Circle Impact. It's also worth noting that a lot of players have at least a C1 Farina, and if you do have any of her constellations, you'll more than likely see better results sticking to Vaporize, since this Overload team can't scale any higher here, since it's all 4 stars. But Overload is still a great option for Traveler, as long as the Circle Impact isn't an issue. And those are all of the teams I recommend for DPS Traveler, so let's look into their ARF-filled teams. As an ARF fielder, Pyro Traveler is primarily providing ARF fill Pyro every 3 seconds for it seems to be about an 11-second duration, while also buffing with Scroll and having a small damage bonus buff from your C1. It's 6%, but it goes up to 15% if the active character is in Night Soul Blessing. Now, Pyro every 3 seconds is far from great, and the uptime isn't great either, so there won't be too many team options that Off-Field Traveler fits into, primarily just teams that don't mind the slow application and low uptime. The first and most obvious team for this is Kinich. The bar for improving Kinich's team was literally just being better than Toma. Traveler is providing 55 damage bonus to Kinich and 40 to Emily, so it goes without saying that this is way better and takes Kinich's team DPS to over 100,000, which is pretty insane for a team with a free unit. You are probably wondering how this compares to using Mavwika instead of Traveler, and on the calcs, Mavrika is about 13% more team DPS, as she deals way more damage than Traveler and buffs by more, but Traveler has some nice advantages. With Mavrika, you want to use her after Bennett, which makes it so that you can't use Emily's burst during Bennett's uptime, otherwise you miss a lot of buff uptime on Kinich. Traveler is used before Bennett, so this is no issue with them. Plus, Traveler takes much less fill time. You can actually skip Traveler's burst with Kinich, and they'll only take a single second of fill time. So you can have much faster rotation setups and start doing damage on Kinich much faster. Depending on how much investment you have on your Kinich and Emily, these advantages Traveler has can actually make them perform better than Mavwika, which again is pretty darn great for a free unit. I also looked into using Traveler with Mualani. Traveler skill does provide sufficient application for Mualani in single target, and does as well in AoE as long as you wait a bit. However, Traveler's skill is expired by the time Mualani casts her burst at the end of her fill time, so the burst won't vape. Mualani's burst does a ton of damage, more than a shark bite, so missing Vaporize on that is way too big of a loss to be worth it over using Xiangling or Mavwika. Something else I looked into is Burgeon, because Traveler's Tap E hits every second while it is active, similar to Toma, while also buffing the team with Scroll. The team I tried was Kokomi, Farina, Nahida, and Traveler, and unfortunately, Burgeon is just not that great. While Hyperbloom teams get high amounts of Bloom Seeds due to how Electrocharged interacts with Dendro, Burgeon cannot do the same, so I was only getting about 7 Burgeons per rotation. As a result, the team is pretty weak, just like any other Borgian team, so I really can't sing the praises of this. Then the only other team that Traveler seems viable as an off-fielder in is Overload, specifically Raiden Overload. Traveler can act somewhat as a middle ground between Zhongling and Bennett, providing some buffing, but less than Bennett, and also some sub-DPS damage, but less than Zhongling. Unfortunately, because Traveler is much worse than Bennett and Zhongling at both respective roles, this is not an upgrade, at least not in the calcs, but it's only slightly behind using Zhongling as far as the calcs go, so you may find the extra buffing to be better than having Zhongling if you have a very well invested Raiden. And that's all the teams I recommend playing Pyro Traveler in. So let's go over how to build them. Talent priority is actually pretty important to know with Traveler since we don't have all of their special talent materials yet. If you are on-fielding Traveler, prioritize their normal attack as it is where most of the damage comes from, then the burst as it does good front-loaded damage, and then the skill. If you are off-fielding Traveler, prioritize burst, then skill. Traveler's artifact sets are also very straightforward. As an on-fielder, you'll be using Obsidian Codex since Traveler is a Night Soul DPS. If you don't have it available, you can use Marishusei Hunter, assuming Farina is on the team, otherwise Gilded Dreams or Crimson Witch. However, Codex is much better than these sets, so you'll want to get it. As an off-fielder, you're pretty much always going to be using Scroll, since that's where the vast majority of Traveler's value is coming from. And for Traveler's main stats, as an on-fielder in a Vaporized team, you want to use EM Sands. Attack can be used, but EM is better by quite a bit. And of course, you'll be using Attack if you're using a Chevrolet Overload team. And then, always Pyro Goblet and a Crit Circlet. For off-field Pyro Traveler, ER Sands if you don't already have enough ER, then Pyro and Crit. Substats focus on Crit, then EM, then Attack, and also ER until you have enough to burst every rotation. And for those energy requirements, something to keep in mind is that Traveler doesn't actually need to burst at the same point every rotation. They can burst early in one rotation and later in the next. So in practice, they will likely need less energy recharge than what the ER calcs show. You should treat these numbers as an absolute maximum to aim for. In Vaporize with Auron in the team, you can need up to around 130 to 145%. Without Auron, it's up to 150%. And for the Chevrolet Overload team, up to 128%. And now lastly, for Traveler's weapons, as an on-fielder, their best options will generally be Mist Splitter, Light of Foliar Incision if Vaporize, and a Jade Cutter, though Jade Cutter can be difficult to build around since Codex already gives a lot of crit rate. Finale of the Deep and Harbinger of Dawn are good free-to-play options, assuming you can proc and or maintain their passives. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about Pyro Traveler, so what's the full analysis? As an on-field DPS, Traveler is surprisingly solid. I would actually rate them as a high B tier DPS, so at the very least, above the likes of Yoimiya and Klee, but certainly below the other 5-star Pyro DPS. That's a pretty solid spot considering this is a free unit, and since Traveler is free and doesn't cost any Primo Gems, you can use those primos that you would have spent getting another Pyro DPS, and instead use them on getting a 5-star weapon, or constellations on your supports, so that's a legitimate advantage that Traveler has. And for off-field Traveler, unfortunately the off-field side of their kit is pretty undertuned and isn't actually great anywhere other than with Kinich, and arguably with Raiden. But with Kinich, it should be said Kinich is one of the strongest DPS in the entire game right now, so Traveler being legitimately one of, if not the best 4th slot for him is fantastic. But it is disappointing that Traveler isn't great off-field anywhere else. So overall, this is without question the best Traveler kit we have ever had by far. It's certainly not what I wanted. I personally wanted them to be an attack buffer, something like without Bennett's Circle Impact and a slightly longer duration, but also without the heal link and maybe like 200 to 300 less attack to balance it out. But that was probably hoping for too much. And yeah, that's all I have got for today. If you liked today's video, please be sure to give a like and subscribe, and also comment your thoughts down below. And feel free to join my Discord where you can chat with me and our little community directly. Thanks and goodbye.